You start with the baby. The baby should be 9 to 12 weeks of age, and you sit face to face, 15 inches apart. You mix 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 cup of water, and mix them together. Take the baby's pacifier, stick it in the sugar water, plunk it in the baby's mouth, and wait for 3.5 minutes. When the timer goes off, stop. The baby is magnetized, and you may walk out of the room. Come back in about 10 minutes later with lots of other people, and what you discover is the baby ignores everybody. The baby looks only at you and gurgles and coos and throws you a seductive shoulder and is really looking at you quite adoringly.
The United States has a love affair with meat. In virtually any form, at almost every meal, even as a snack. For people of all ages, socializing, or staying home. For our pets and for ourselves, meat is on the menu. It is part of our national heritage. In the country and in the city. In times of peace and in times of war. From generation to generation. In many ways, meat is America.
The United States takes second place in the world in the consumption of meat, and the traditional barbecue isn't the only reason. Americans eat meat on the go. A large number of fast food chains sell burgers and hot dogs. The average citizen of the United States eats 124 kilos of meat a year.
In
In countries like Bangladesh, meat is a luxury. Raising animals takes up a lot of space, and that is at a premium in a country which is often flooded. The staple of Bengali diets is rice and dal, a spicy lentil dish, or fish curry. At just 3.2 kilos, Bangladesh has the world's lowest annual per capita consumption of meat.
Whether we eat a lot or none at all, human beings have a long history with meat. We descend from creatures who survived because they could eat almost anything, and who dominated the animal kingdom by perfecting ways to obtain meat. Our digestive system closely resembles that of the chimpanzees, who mostly eat fruit, but who are also predators. They will eat insects, monkeys, wild pigs, even antelopes. Early humans in cold climates especially needed an ability to survive on something other than plants. Our distant predecessors grasped generally what modern science now tells us specifically. Our brains love what meat does for us. In fact, along with an increased ability to hunt and fish, came a corresponding increase in brain size. With bigger brains came better ways to get meat. We came up with better tools and more effective techniques. Eventually, through domestication, we came up with a way to provide ourselves with a perpetual supply of meat. Lori Houston, president of Animal Acres Sanctuary Farm, introduces us to the three most popular sources of meat in the United States.
The laying hens, right after they come out of the cages, and you see them walk for the first time in their lives. Remember, they're about a year to 2 years old, and they literally take steps like this. They don't know how to walk, but within a day, they're out, checking out the grass, and you see them do all those behaviors the very first day they're out of those cages. They were both former veal calves. They've been with us since they were just a few weeks old, and they're not full grown yet. They get to be full grown when they're about 3 years old. So believe it or not, this one is still a baby. He's still growing up. They're some of our best ambassadors because people learn about the cruelty of dairy production.
She's only about 3-4 pounds when we got her. A jumper will be this size one day.
They go to slaughter when they're only 6 months of age. They have already reached 250 pounds. And then, of course, the ones that live out their lives at sanctuaries will get up to be about 800 to 900 pounds. Churchill, I think, put it best in a nutshell. Dogs look up to us, cats look down on people, but pigs look you right in the eye.
Domesticated animals are distant relatives of the creatures who helped us become who we are today. Carnivorism has given us the ability to question our relationship with meat. When we do, we see that, at least here in the United States, that relationship has changed dramatically. What used to require an intimate connection with nature now takes place in a factory as far away from most consumers as possible. What was once a sacred undertaking is now a secular drive for profit that has soiled the water, transformed the landscape, and contributed to the global food crisis. What was once necessary is now taken for granted, and we implicate our children in a moral crisis before they can understand the risk. In spite of this, per capita meat consumption in the U.S. has risen steadily throughout the country's history. Biology is one reason why. Packed with nutrients, meat provides deep satisfaction to the human brain. In fact, our very survival depends on our brains enjoying animal-derived food. Dr. Neil Bernard, founder of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, explains how this process begins and why it's so important.
I found a paper in 1981 written by a researcher at Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. And he had found a substance in dairy products that looks very much like morphine. And he did a variety of biochemical studies and published in Science, the journal Science, in 1981, his conclusion that it is morphine. You know poppy plants, opium poppies, they have the enzymes for producing narcotics, opium. And a cow's liver, by a fluke of nature, has similar enzymes that make morphine. and codeine. There's not a lot of it. There's just tiny traces, especially in the spring, less in the fall. Now, for chemists in the audience, this is what the casomorphins look like. And it raises the question, what the heck are they doing there? Why would we have opiate compounds in milk? And I want to offer you my theory. My theory is that nature doesn't like leaving anything to chance. If the baby calf did not like nursing and turned away and said, "Mom, I'm just going to go wander in the woods today," or if a breastfeeding baby turned away from the breast, they wouldn't do well. They wouldn't thrive. So nature builds milk with protein and fat and sugar and hormones and growth factors of various kinds and a nice little narcotic effect.
The step from dairy to meat requires little prompting for a hungry brain. And the step from satisfaction to overindulgence can be equally simple. Soon what was once a way to get energy can turn into a habit that is very hard to break. Savvy merchants have long known the appeal of meat. Here in the U.S., they have mastered the art of providing meat in vast quantities and low prices. Unfortunately, nutritionists now agree that U.S. citizens consume meat in unhealthy quantities. On average, a person needs between 30 to 50 grams of protein a day, most of which could come from plants. U.S. citizens, however, consume twice that amount of protein every day, 75% of which comes from another animal. The well-documented results of this overconsumption are widely varied and evident at all ages, and include type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and some types of cancer. The science is clear. When meat is the subject, a little goes a long way. However, when profit meets desire, healthy living takes a back seat. So does the environment.
Spread across the wide open landscape of Lenawee County, Michigan, a quilt-like patchwork of family farms has flourished for generations.
Gene is my husband of 30 years of marriage. He grew up on a family farm. He's always been on a family farm. And we've raised our children here since 1981.
But beginning in the late 1990s, this idyllic agricultural setting mutated into something toxic and damaging. The culprits were factory farms, concentrated animal feeding operations, known as CAFOs.
I like to refer to them as animal factories because the animals are nothing more than machines. They don't get to see the outdoors their entire life.
CAFOs can house between 700 and 1 million head of livestock in confined spaces. The animal excrement produced daily at a medium-sized factory farm is equal to a city of 70,000 people. Untreated waste is channeled into huge open pits. A toxic brew of feces, chemicals, hormones, bacteria, antibiotics, and blood creates noxious fumes and dangerous compounds. It is then sprayed as fertilizer, seeping into groundwater and local streams.
We've seen 12 CAFOs come in within a 10-mile radius of our farms, and we've got over 60 lagoons with over 400 million gallons of waste.
Modern meat production wastes resources that are truly global, including water, food, land, and clean air. With millions of people suffering from malnutrition, most of the corn and soybeans grown in the world are used to feed chickens, cows, and pigs. Our complex relationship with meat is made even more so when we consider those people who eat no meat at all. Our oldest examples of this is in India, where many children are raised to see non-human animals in a different light, not as a meal or a mascot, but as fellow participants in a moral journey.
I don't strive. I never was cut out, step out and strut out. Give me the simple life.
We often feel free to use other animals in any way we see fit. In addition to using them for food, we have fabricated their endorsement of our market economy. We use them to sell cars, to sell insurance, to sell telephones. We even use them to sell themselves. In many ways, we have turned living creatures into things. Of course, the tradition of compassion for all life is not limited to India. The Greek mathematician Pythagoras was a vegetarian whose ideas influenced early Christianity, informing the beliefs of such revered leaders as St. Jerome and St. Francis of Assisi. These thinkers in turn inspired some of the greatest names in art and science. $500 million vegetarians worldwide challenge a predominantly Christian country like the United States to reconsider the meaning of sacrifice.
What we have is a Jesus who is the Prince of Peace. And it's important to remember where that comes from. It comes from the prophet Isaiah. And the Prince of Peace in Isaiah 11 is ushering in God's new age of nonviolence. If we read Isaiah 11, the holy mountain is filled with the knowledge of the Lord, where even the lion lies down with the lamb, and there is no bloodshed whatsoever.
Our food choices mean that bloodshed is a daily reality here in the U.S. The meat industry is the single largest component of United States food production, with access to tremendous resources. As with any business, the meat industry is driven to increase consumer demand, and it goes to great lengths to make this happen. In addition, industry leaders have deep ties to government power. And influence in surprising places.
The American Cancer Society is a huge nonprofit organization, has apparently not figured out what their nutritional scientists know. They're sponsoring an event in Atlanta called the Cattle Barons Ball, which has as its principal coordinators the owners of the Buckhead Beef Company. And these are phenomenally wealthy people in Atlanta, and they're trying to raise money for cancer. Now, cancer researchers, if there's one thing that is really clear, it's that individuals who eat a lot of beef have more colon cancer, probably 300% more than other people. Saturated fat is linked to breast cancer, so why is the American Cancer Society doing this? Well, it's not just doing it in Atlanta. They're doing it out here. They're doing them all around the country, having people dress up in cowboy attire and go in, and they are served ribs. And they then give money, and you know where the money goes? We're afraid of telling the truth about cancer. We say, get your mammogram, get screened so that we find it. Now, I want to find cancer if it's there, but I don't want it to be there. Or let's raise money for better treatments. Well, if you've got it, let's treat it. But there's a third step, and that's to prevent it from happening, and that is never going to happen if we don't separate ourselves from the things that cause it.
Access to resources means greater control over the message. 82% of all food commercials on the nation's largest cable television provider feature some type of meat for sale. The meat industry is also very active in the public school system, where almost every meal contains at least the option of meat. Science tells us that we are not obligate carnivores like cats or predatory birds. The notion that meat is preferred or necessary is crafted by market forces, and consumers who grew up on that message have a difficult time cutting back or quitting even when they want to.
There he is. I adopted a donkey named Honky Tonk. I became vegetarian because I would be healthier, and then I found out that all these animals were being abused because of the factory farms. At school, I tell everybody pigs are being hung and like how they're being put in boiled water to burn off all their hair. And they're all surprised, and they all say they want to become vegetarian, but their parents aren't, and they just don't know how. They don't have the information.
The information exists, but it's unpleasant, and most people avoid it when possible. Marketers are careful to only show consumers what they want to see, and consumers are careful to avoid looking too closely. Because when they do, they see things they may not like. Sympathy, Rousseau recognized, is a power that relies on proximity. Creating distance between sympathizer and sympathized disconnects us from the rest of nature. Children especially feel conflicted about meat. And why wouldn't they? When they are asked to sympathize with these characters, but not these. The founders of the United States adopted a symbolic posture towards meat from the beginning, when they chose the exclusively carnivorous bald eagle over the predominantly grass-eating turkey as our national symbol. We can understand why humans love meat. It has an almost universal appeal and is deeply rooted in our biology. Nevertheless, if we are honestly to address our relationship with carnivory, we must first acknowledge the degree to which meat eating is a choice.
Are human beings natural meat eaters? Let's find out. First, let's examine the teeth and jaws. Meat eaters have more canines than molars, and their jaws are long and pointy. Herbivores have mostly flat teeth and rounded jaws for grinding vegetation. A meat eater's intestines are very short, thus enabling it to eliminate its food quickly.
Human beings are omnivores. We can eat meat, but we don't have to. Even the USDA has formally recognized that meat eating is actually more of a luxury than a daily requirement. On a species-wide scale, our ability to consume other animals is clearly one reason we still exist. Ensuring this omnivorism is probably desirable. Here in the United States, however, our greatest threat is not from losing the ability to eat meat. Instead, it's from cultivating an inability to stop.
The fact is, my grandpa was a cattle rancher, and my dad grew up on a cattle ranch, and my uncles and cousins are all in that business. So I don't consider them the enemy. I consider them to be people at the same risk as everybody else, and they need this message. So I'm describing to these guys in Lubbock about how particles of cholesterol enter the artery wall, and they cause artery blockages to gradually grow, and that causes heart attacks. We have 4,000 of them every single day.
In a very real sense, we are all the meat industry. Are we willing to eat less to prevent pollution? Are we willing to pay more for regulation?
The people around here don't want money. What they want is the pollution to stop. And you can do it. You give the enforcement agencies the power to write a ticket and close them down until they can clean up their act.
Are we willing to consider that animals are not just tools for us to use? Are we willing to ask ourselves difficult questions?
What does it mean that animals are treated as so many inanimate objects today? What does it mean that chickens are given less space per bird to live their lives than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. That they're crammed by the tens of thousands into these sheds, cooped in their own feces. That their beaks are seared off without any kind of anesthetics, seared off with a hot iron, so that many of them starve to death because eating becomes so painful.
Our food choices determine our legacy.
I think we need to train our children to raise food for the next generation. And if there was a case where a CAFO could run properly, they would have to put animals out on pasture where the family farmer has raised food for generations.
A subject as big as carnivorism is not just about food choices. Instead, this is a discussion of the stewardship of life, our own included. In such a difficult discussion, compassion may be our best guide, an attribute children seem to have in abundance. We should remember that our almost national bird was spared at a recent White House Thanksgiving, not because of President Obama, but because of his 2 daughters.
Goes off, stop. The baby is magnetized, and you may walk out of the room.